right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Ooh, that's loud when it's right in your own ear, and it's your own voice especially. Tonight we are finishing up our series of sermons and Bible studies going through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Tonight we're going to be covering 3rd John and looking at the topic, I guess you would call it, of hospitable in truth. 3rd John, the core of what John is teaching about, the core thing he's addressing is the hospitality that we as believers should have for one another, and especially for others that are, as he addressed here, passing through, I guess would be a way to say it. Just to give a little background before we jump into it, and I know we mentioned this a little bit on Sunday, but we're going to kind of move through some of the things we talked about Sunday. We're going to touch on real quick. Some of them we're not going to touch because we did them pretty well on Sunday, but hopefully through it we'll get an all-around idea. Before I give you the background on it, though, I want to give you a quick update. As we speak, there is a sheetrock crew that is cleaning up their mess and moving out of the building because they came in today and they hung, floated, and put the texture on the ceiling for all the nursery area where we lost our ceiling. So that is done, and as soon as it's dry, we can put paint on the ceiling, the walls, put our lights back, and get some flooring in and move all the new stuff that was purchased and bought for the nursery, and the nursery will be ready to go. We also have a crew that has been here most of the day installing our new sign out on Blankenship. And just a few minutes ago, they were about to put on the last panel for that. So those two projects got taken care of today, and that's exciting to see more of the work getting done and getting finished so that we get that much closer to getting our facilities back up and running the way we need them and want them. But back to our lesson for tonight, some background into 3rd John. Of course, we know it was written to Gaius, or depending on whether you're looking at the Greek or the Aramaic, possibly Caius, believed to be one of 3 Gaius individuals that are mentioned in the New Testament. One from Macedonia, mentioned in Acts 19:29, one in Corinth, mentioned in Romans 16:23, or one in Derbe, mentioned in Acts 20, verse 4. So one of those is believed to be who this individual is, each one of those different men, but most likely one of those 3 is who John is writing to here. And the purpose of commending, or the purpose of the letter was to commend to Gaius Christians who were strangers in the place where he lived, who had gone there for the purpose of ministering on behalf of John, commending Gaius for his effort, but also emphasizing the need to be careful because of, and we know from Sunday, Diotrephes, who was creating some problems for that in the area, and also the commendation we saw for Demetrius, who apparently, and we'll see that here in a minute with the lesson, was someone that Gaius possibly already knew, someone that John knew very well, and more than likely was the one who carried the actual letter to Gaius. So more than likely the courier of the letter was also in the content of the letter, is what most theologians believe. Now, earlier this week, I put a thing out on Facebook asking 3 questions and asked anybody to answer those in their own opinion, and I want to share some of the responses with you. I don't know if you had a chance to read any of them when you were putting yours, because several of you answered those for us, but I want to give you just kind of a summary of what was stated. The first question was, what are some standards of hospitality you were raised to show? Here's some of the responses. Coffee and dessert were offered anytime a guest showed up, or they were invited to stay and eat if it was near mealtime. The house was always clean just in case someone came by, more to create a welcoming environment than it was just the appearance of a tidy home. Adults would visit inside while the kids played outside, and the TV turned off so that a full attention could be given to the guest that was there. Manners were used by the kids and adults alike, with yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir, used in each and every answer, or even just in regular conversation. Which, by the way, I have for years had people tell me, Don't ma'am me, don't sir me. If I do, it's not because I think you're old, it's just the way I grew up. I do that even with my own kids. We say it to our kids because we want them to have that tendency to say it to everyone, their own friends, their others. So, I mean, y'all know we're in the South. It's not a young person to old person thing. It's a polite thing. It's a Southern courtesy, if you would. Possibly even a meal brought to a neighbor or a friend that was either in need or someone new to the community. Somebody put they would have missionaries over when they would come to visit the church and share testimonies, or traveling through the area. Taking people into the home to live with them as they needed, whenever was needed. Hosting game nights, holiday get-togethers for family and friends, swim parties, and things of that nature. So these were all things that the answers for how hospitality was done that you saw growing up, and I guess in a sense how you continue to do yourselves. Now, why do people show hospitality was the second question, and these were a lot more, I guess, cut and dry. It's polite and welcoming. Aside from the social customs, it's also to make others feel special or important. It's the way we were raised, to show respect and honor to your company. Good upbringing and compassion or affection, to show compassion and affection for your guest. And ladies, for Southerners, it's just what we did. It's just part of how we grew up. We're called to it in God's Word, and we know that relationships are what encourage us, bring joy to us, strengthen us, and help people feel cared for. And in Hebrews, it says to show hospitality to strangers, because it could have been an angel that we were unaware of. And then the third question was, how have hospitality standards changed in your lifetime? Similar answers in various ways of presenting, I think. People are in too much of a hurry to be courteous to each other. There's much less detail tended to. Social media has created a false sense of connectedness that loosely meets the need of true hospitality. Oftentimes TV's too loud, having pets and kids interrupting the conversation, jumping on you, kids trying to get involved in adult conversations, and even the people hosting the guests too distracted by other things, all of that creating not so much of a hospitality atmosphere. People seem to have gotten busier, or perhaps they feel that taking time to visit with people might be an intrusion on their time. You used to be able to show up for coffee and cake. Now no one wants you to show up unannounced. I think the act of hospitality is still the same, but the busyness of people is what has changed the most. We don't put a priority on relationships and visiting like we need to. Everyone is so busy and have so much to get done. Most families have both parents working. It's easier to visit by phone or Facebook while folding clothes. When they do have a free minute, they're usually sleeping. And when death comes to our parents, the glue is gone that pulls family together. So kind of a similar tone, if you would, throughout the different answers to those questions. But it kind of gives us a perspective on what we know to be hospitality, and kind of where it is now, or where we see it defaulting, if you would. Now, in the opening statements of the lesson, they're on page 85, he opened, the very first thing he says in the lesson, I have often wondered how a church that had some of the most wonderful, kind, and godly people in it could also have some of the meanest, self-centered, and divisive people in it as well. John's third letter shows us that this is not a new phenomenon, but rather has been the case since the birth of the church. And that is a big focus of what John is addressing and what he is calling to attention in this letter. And I think that perspective from the author of the Bible study really kind of helps us to understand. We see it from time to time in churches. It may not be in every church, but we see it in churches, and we see it in Christians in general. But it's not something new. It's not something that's just been created. It's not something that's happened just in the last few years. It's not something that happened just because there's a new church in town, or there's a new pastor in town, or there's a new family in town. It's something that's been around for a long time. And so we need to take these guidelines, we need to take these encouragements and these warnings that John gives to us very personal. We need to take them very serious to make sure that we guard our own hearts from becoming the negative person, but also that we can protect our church from being overwhelmed by people that have that negative personality. In today's letter, we're going to witness both the asset and liability of hospitality in the homes of the first century church and Christians. So much as similar to Sunday, we talked about the tale of three men. Tonight, we talk about the tale of two church members and look at a comparison that John gives here in this letter. But as you came in, you may have grabbed one of the sheets. If you didn't, make sure you grab one before you leave. I don't think it's necessary for you to have it right now. If you have it, great. If not, it's okay. Just grab one before you go. But this worksheet lists the different characteristics mentioned in the text about these men. You'll recognize it. It's the things that we emphasized in the message on Sunday. But in a general sense, we saw on Sunday that Gaius and Demetrius were both godly men with strong reputations for being faithful to the truth, and Gaius especially for being hospitable to the representatives from that John would send and had sent in the past, which likely meant that he was not only a disciple of John, but he was a disciple in good standing with John. So let's go ahead and read the first few verses of 3 John, and then we're going to dive into the study for tonight. So starting in verse 1, it says, "The elder to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in truth. Dear friend, I pray that you may prosper in every way and be in good health, just as your soul prospers. For I was very glad when some brothers came and testified to your faithfulness to the truth, how you were walking in the truth. And I have no greater joy than this, than to hear that my children are walking in truth." So this idea of went too far. The three men that we find here, we're going to look again tonight at Gaius, Demetrius, and Diotrephes. We're going to look at the things that John says about them and possibly dig into some different things that we didn't look at on Sunday morning. So as we look on page 85, another quote from the book, as we look at what it means to walk in the truth and show biblical hospitality, we can learn from each of these men. Now, with Gaius and Demetrius, we learn how to do it right, and we learn what we're supposed to do. From Diotrephes, we learn what not to do, what to guard against, what to protect ourselves from. Now, as John begins the letter, he identifies himself once again, just like he did in 2 John, as the elder. But here he greets Gaius, my dear friend. So what did John mean by the term, my dear friend? Well, it's believed to be that this is a clear representation on John's part, a description of the close and personal relationship that he had with the adjective agaperos, which means beloved, or here translated dear friend. Gaius was not someone new to John. He wasn't someone that John considered an acquaintance. He was someone that John knew deeply, that John knew personally, and that John had a close relationship with. And the lesson pulled out in some of the study notes that good friends are always important. Whether we're talking church members or even pastors, good friends are important because we need Christian friends to lean on. We need Christian friends to be there for us, to talk to confide in, sometimes to vent to. We need them to be there whenever things get tough so that we have people to come alongside us and to help. And if nothing else, this last year has taught us the importance of being there for one another and having good friends that show up when things get tough and when things go wrong. So what marks a relationship between good friends? If you were to say, here's the most important thing for two friends to share if they're going to have this kind of friendship where they would consider each other a dear friend, what would you say that one thing is? What is so important that you have to have this to have a good friendship? Trust? What's that? Okay, faith in God. Yeah. As Christians, we want to make sure that our closest friends are Christians as well. And even with those two, we could develop that into so much. Trust and faith in God, we can add to it or bring more definition to it, talking about integrity and talking about them being reliable, being honest. These things are critical ideas, critical concepts for good friends, because the way you become a good friend with someone is you learn that you can trust them. You learn that they're reliable. You learn that you can depend on them. And you do the same in return, and because of that, you grow closer to each other, and eventually one day, you develop that type of relationship where you may refer to that individual the same way that John does, my dear friend. But when he makes the statement, my dear friend, I pray that you may prosper, or excuse me, back up, my dear friend Gaius, I love you in the truth. Using the article, the truth, and not just I love you in truth, but in the truth, describes that his love for Gaius speaks of almost a location. I love you in the arena of truth. I love you in the sense that we walk in the truth together. It wasn't just a love in, hey man, we're buddies, but I love you because I see that you're faithful. I love you because I know that you're a man of God. I love you because I know that you have a heart for God. It was something deeper than just, hey man, we've known each other a long time, we're good friends. There was something more to the friendship that they had. And it's believed that John's reference to the truth, again, the truth is the gospel, known from the beginning of the incarnate Son of God. It's something that John brings up over and over and over throughout all three letters in his reference to the truth. And notice again, I know we talked about this a little bit Sunday, so I don't want to harp on it too much, but it is still such a... to me, such a big statement that is made, the wish for Gaius' physical health to match that of his spiritual health. To me, this, again, is just a tremendous commendation of acknowledgement to the strength and validity of Gaius' spiritual life, that there was so much that he lived out in his faith, that his faith was so strong for him to say to him, I hope that your physical well-being equals that of your spiritual well-being. Just a huge, huge statement. John also mentions that Gaius was reported to be walking in the truth. We've seen that term over and over, and again, walking as a public lifestyle with emphasis on consistency. That you didn't just act on truth in this one instance, but you continually, constantly walk and live out the truth. Apparently, Gaius had consistently showed himself a true believer in what he said and in what he did. And then the fact that John used the term, my children. I pray that you would prosper in every way, be in good health. I was glad when my brothers came, testified of your faithfulness to the truth. I have no greater joy than this, that to hear that my children are walking in truth. To reference Gaius as one of his children reveals that he considered Gaius to be part of his heritage of ministry. Gaius, you're part of my legacy in that church. You're part of the ones that I have invested in. You're one of the ones that when I look at you, I am reminded of the time that we spent together. I'm reminded of the success that has come through the Lord. All of this is playing into effect. And like John, we can have and can take a genuine interest in the spiritual and physical lives of our friends, knowing that or knowing they work in tandem as we walk in truth and in love. If we are investing in our friends and our friends are investing in us, not only are we going to grow closer together and have more dependable friends and better friendships, but we're also going to encourage and charge and challenge each other to walk more faithfully in the truth. And again, that goes back to what John was saying over and over and over in 1 John, that we're commanded to love one another. If we have that love, if we develop those relationships, the automatic response of it is we're going to walk in truth. We're going to live the life that God wants us to live, especially when we learn to not only encourage but depend on one another. The second section of the lesson is titled Partnering Together for the Spread of the Gospel. Starts on page 87. And this part covers verses 5 through 8. So let's read those, and then we'll get into the lesson a bit. It says, Dear friend, you are showing your faith by whatever you do for the brothers, and this you are doing for strangers. They have testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God, since they set out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from pagans. Therefore, we ought to support such men so that we can be co-workers with the truth. Now, with that, the lesson told a summarized story of Corrie ten Boom's family. Her father attempted to rescue Jews and help them escape the Nazis in the Netherlands by hiding them in his watch shop. And they talked about in the first level of their home, he had a watch shop where he did repairs and things of that nature. And he created a hidden room in his house. And when Jews would come, when he'd find Jewish friends that were being hunted down by the Nazis, he'd bring them in. He'd hide them until the Nazis were gone and then try to help them escape and get out. But eventually, they were discovered, and their family was arrested and sent to the concentration camps themselves. They literally put their life and the safety of their own family on the line to help others. The main reason why they felt compelled in sharing about this was because of their Christian faith. Because of their faith in the Lord, they had a deep desire to show compassion and hospitality towards these other individuals, to seek to protect them and to help them. Now, on page 87, there was a quote here where it says, "Receiving strangers, especially when it puts our own interest in danger, is an act of love that is noteworthy." When we put ourselves on the line to help others, the lesson says it's noteworthy, and I believe it's true. What is it that the scriptures tell us? Greater love has no man than this, than he lay down his life for his friends. When we put our own selves, and it's not always to put ourselves at risk. Sometimes it may call for that. Thankfully, we don't see that too often here in the U.S., but in other countries where Christianity is illegal, there are people every day that are putting their own lives on the line. We have missionaries who put their own lives and their families' lives on the line because they willingly go into these religiously hostile areas for the purpose of trying to expand the kingdom and spread the gospel to people who need it the most. That is a tremendous statement of the love that we have not only for God but for others, when we're willing to do that, when we're willing to make that sacrifice. Now, take a look on page 94 and 95. It's towards the end of the lesson, but the section called A Closer Look. As the lesson points out, the Greek word translated here in verse 8 of what we just read as support means to receive, to take under, or to take up. When John was commending Gaius for his support to other believers, he wasn't just saying you support them in one aspect. It was a word that gave a much bigger picture than just, well, you took them and you gave them a place to sleep, or you fed them some food while you were there. You collected an offering for them while they were there. It actually gives the idea of all of that in one. In that the support could have been to receive them into his home, to take them under his care, to take them up as in to provide for them and take care of them. All of that is what John is commending Gaius for doing in his attempt to do that. So clearly the concept of hospitality is visible in the wording of what John is commending him for. And this implies that the favor being shown will be to those outside of one's normal circle of friends and family. When he's talking about the hospitality, he's not just talking about taking care of the people that we naturally take care of. Again, very similar to what Jesus said when he said, you've heard it said, love those who love you. He says, but, basically, I'm not quoting, but basically says, that's too easy. I have something new for you. Love those who hate for you. Pray for those who persecute you. Jesus took it to a new level. It's easy to love those who love you in return. I mean, that's the easiest thing. If you can't love somebody who loves you, then there's a problem somewhere. But Jesus says we should take it even further than that. And so what John is commending him for is not just the fact, and it's not to say that Gaius didn't reach out to his immediate community and those in his immediate surroundings, But he especially emphasized the fact that he did this for strangers, that he did well for strangers in being faithful to help them and to show favor to them. Those outside of his regular circle of influence, he still cared for and looked after them. You know, we're told in Scripture to practice hospitality in 1 Peter 4:9. Be hospitable to one another without complaining. That actually takes it to a new level. It's not just be hospitable, but be hospitable without complaining. Ah, they're here again. You know, I know sometimes that's the feeling when family comes over, or when that same friend shows up for the 5th time that week and shows up right at dinner time, just, like clockwork. They know exactly when the food's coming out. But the encouragement, the instruction in Scripture was to show hospitality, but to do it without complaining. In other words, don't let it become a command that we obey, but rather a gift that we give. An appreciation for all that God has blessed us, so then we turn and we bless others in like kind. Now, the personal reflection on page 95 and 96 at the end of the lesson is an opportunity to take an honest assessment of our individual hospitality level. It's really, that's the best way to put it, in your face, to make you confront where you are and what you need to work on as far as your hospitality, your own personal hospitality. Particularly question number 4 in there, which says, what can you personally do? And I like this, not a program, not a church program, but you as an individual. What can you personally do to make your church or Bible study group more hospitable? Now, I'm not looking for answers to be shouted out, but I'm saying so often we have people that will, and I've done it myself, and I've had people come to me, boy, Brother Jason, I just wish that our church would do, and they throw something out there. Well, good. I wish we would too. Normally when there's something we need to do, God puts it on somebody's heart, and the person whose heart is most burdened for it is the best person to get started. So I had one pastor tell me every time somebody comes and says, Brother Jason, we need to start such and such. Good. You come up with a plan. You come up with a strategy. You recruit the helpers, and then come back to me, and we'll figure out if we can do it. And so one of two things happens every time. It ends up being one of the best things that's ever happened because the person who cares about it the most just took ownership and runs it till it accomplishes everything it needs to, or it dies right there because it was just one person's opinion and not something they actually wanted to do. What this question challenges, and what I looked at it as, is for me, God, am I doing my part to make sure that our church is viewed as hospitable? Am I doing my part to make sure that when I meet with people, whether it's in a Sunday school class or a church setting or a Bible study, even away from church, or just a fellowship and get together, am I doing my part to make sure that our church is hospitable? Because if we all would do that, if every member of every church would ask themselves that question and push themselves to do hospitality the way God has called us to and the way God leads us to, then there'd never be a question about whether or not the church is hospitable, because it would be so much so that it would almost be, offensive wouldn't be the right word, but it might be nauseating to some people that everybody wanted to welcome them and everybody wanted to hug them. And I actually, in the past, have had people come to me and says, oh, Jason, I don't know if I can come to your church. Oh, what happened? Man, everybody was too friendly. I'm like, well, I can live with that. If you can't take all the handshakes, the hugs, and the good mornings, we're glad you're here, then, maybe you do need to go somewhere else. I'm definitely not going to stand in front of any church and go, look, you folks are too friendly. You need to quit. To me, that's the best problem to have, if we're too friendly. So what if the biggest problem the church had was people complaining that we were overly hospitable? What a tremendous testament that a church could have that, man, the minute I walked in the door, I felt like I was home. And it made me want to go back. That's what proper hospitality creates. So with that in mind, what is the relationship between our willingness to be hospitable and our testimony? If we're going to make this personal and get out of the big picture of church and focus, what do I need to do? How do I need to change my hospitality? What is the relationship between willingness to be hospitable and our testimony? Well, I believe the level of our hospitality reveals the reality of our testimony. I think you learn a lot about somebody's faith when you see how hospitable they are to others. If we're not welcoming, if we're not inviting, if we're not loving to others, then it bears the question, where is the love? Is there love? Now, I'm not saying every person that's a Christian needs to show up every Sunday morning with a plate full of cookies and hand out a cookie to everybody who comes in the door. I'm not saying that everybody has to be the type of person that walks up and shakes everybody's hand and hugs everybody's neck. We've got people that do that. Maybe your greatest gift of hospitality is simply to smile at people and tell them good morning. I don't know what it is for you, but if we all do our part, then everybody is going to be welcomed. And it's not a welcome everybody. It's not a aggressively go out and seek everybody. It's about everybody doing their part. Because if every one of us did a little bit, then collectively we would accomplish it all. We'd get it all done. Apparently Gaius took in John's friends without knowing them personally. These friends later told John and his church about how faithful Gaius was, how courteous he was, and the assistance that they gave when they returned, because there in verse 6, he made mention that they have testified to your love before the church. And in studying this lesson, it got me thinking about something that happened to me many years ago, because in my notes to present, it says, share a story from your past of how you either received hospitality or gave hospitality. And though there are many ideas of both, there's one that stands out, and I still tell this story to this day. Back when I was just into the youth group, my very first summer trip that I ever had, our youth group there in Eunice went to Glorieta, New Mexico for youth camp. The camp started on Monday, but we left on Friday. And on Friday, we drove from Eunice all the way up to Dallas. We went to Second Baptist in Dallas and met at the church because our youth pastor had come to us from Second Baptist, where he was helping in the youth ministry there. And he had connections, so rather than us having to stay in a hotel, he had actually lined up for several of the adults in the church that he was close with, took in different groups of teenagers based on how big of a house that they had. And me and one of my best friends at the time were picked up by an older gentleman named Mr. Glenn. Mr. Glenn, I'll paint a picture for you. I don't know what his age was, but to me as a 13-year-old for the first time going stay at somebody's house that I had never met before, Mr. Glenn was an old man. And in all fairness, he was probably in his early, mid-60s at most. But again, to a 13-year-old, he was an old man. He drove a Volkswagen Bug, which that was one thing I thought was cool because I was a big, Herbie fan. And but he had had some form of throat cancer years before. And had the procedure where when he talked to you, he had to cover up the hole in his neck, and his voice sounded awkward. And I'm going to be completely honest with you, and I ended up telling him this later. I was scared to death. As a 13-year-old kid going to the house of a man I had never met before, in a big city I'd never been to before, and it had me very scared. Matter of fact, if Chris got up to go get water, I was thirsty and I went and got water. When Chris got tired and was ready to go to bed, I was tired and ready to go to bed. He and I stayed at the hip, especially the first night. Well, the next day we got up and actually, when we got back to his house, he asked us if we were hungry. And, of course, two teenage guys, yes, we're always hungry. He took us to this burger place that doesn't exist anymore, I guess, because I've tried to find it, but it was called Thunderburger. And if you ever knew what it was probably the coolest burger joint in the world at that time, because when you walked in, the whole theme was Thunderbirds. And in the middle of the restaurant, they had a 1970-something model Ford Thunderbird that was stripped out. Now, it was beautiful paint job on it. The hood was up. The trunk was up. The trunk was where you had your cold drinks on ice because they didn't give you fountain drinks. You got a bottle out of the ice chest that was in the trunk and in the engine compartment. And where there should have been seats, that's where the salad bar was to dress your burgers. Because when you got up there, you ordered your burger, and they handed you your bun, your burger, and if you wanted cheese, and then everything else you put on for yourself. And I just thought that was the coolest thing, because that was just a fine car. Of course, I was a little disappointed that they destroyed a fine car to turn it into a salad bar and a drink box, but it was still cool. And it had that kind of diner theme to it, and they had old music and whatnot, and it just had this really cool vibe about it. And we talked with him, and he told us how they had a basketball game on, and he was a Mavericks fan and all this. And we get finished eating, and we're driving back to his house, and he goes, "Y'all like ice cream?" I'm like, "Yeah, we like ice cream." He takes it to Baskin Robbins. I'd never been to Baskin Robbins. I thought I was in heaven. Walked in. They've got 31 flavors of ice cream. In my house growing up, we had 2 flavors, chocolate, vanilla. Well, and if we were lucky, Mom bought the Neapolitan, so you had 3. I didn't know what to get. And I'm standing there, me and Chris both, and we're just looking, and it's a wall of nothing but ice cream. And finally he goes, "Tell you what, y'all like bananas?" "Yes, sir." "You like chocolate?" "Yeah." "You like pineapple?" "Yes, sir." "You like strawberry?" "Yes, sir." He goes, "Give us 3 banana splits." Now remember, we had just both ate double patty, overstacked burgers, and I don't know how many root beers we each drank, and the fries that we ate. And now he sets these massive banana splits in front of us, and I felt bad. I was sitting there trying to force myself to eat it because I knew better than to throw away food that somebody else bought for me. And finally he goes, "Boys, if y'all can't eat anymore, you don't have to eat it." And we're both like, "Oh." We go back to his house. The next morning he makes pancakes for us. He drops us off at the church. We go spend the day at Six Flags. We come back. And we had another night at his house. He took us somewhere else to go eat, and we went and get ice cream again. So this time we cut back on dinner so we could enjoy the ice cream a little bit more. By the time we left, I didn't want to leave Mr. Glenn's house. In my mind then, it was just because, man, we had so much fun. This guy is so cool. When I was reading this lesson and preparing for this, it hit me. His hospitality turned him from something to be feared to something to love and cherish. And I still think back to that trip. And though I had a great time on the trip, I had a great time my first time ever going to camp, I remember that time with Mr. Glenn. And it just makes a huge statement for me. And so I can see where when John is writing this about Gaius and he's saying, "You're doing it right. You're convincing people of the love that you have," because if there's one thing that I would say about the man that I met in Dallas, Mr. Glenn, he loved the Lord. And it showed in the way he treated 2 young teenage boys, that he had no reason for giving up his Friday night and part of his Saturday to take care of on his own. Matter of fact, Chris and I both enjoyed being with him so much. While we were at Six Flags, at his house, he had this huge collection of souvenir spoons from all over the world. Many of them he had got, I think, while he was in the military service. And so we went into one of the gift shops and bought him one of those souvenir spoons with the Six Flags, and I think it had Bugs Bunny and that kind of stuff on it. And we bought that, brought it back to him, and gave it to him. And we were just proud we could add to his collection because he didn't have one. But the hospitality, and it's such a big thing. And John even goes on, and he talks about the fact that it's something, he tells them, "You would do well to send them on the journey." Verse 8, "Therefore we ought to support such men." This idea of ought to support, it communicates a social obligation. In other words, it's not just well, you might want to think about it, but out of the love that we have for each other, we should be hospitable to each other. We should help one another out. And then he talks about that to support such men so that we can be co-workers with the truth. This idea of co-workers with the truth is the foundation for why Gaius should support these brothers, but not those of the secessionists. So when John was like, these are the ones you should support because these are the ones who are walking in the truth, living in the truth, promoting the truth. These are the people you partner with. These are the ones you pour your life into. These are the ones that you help. And this hospitality should be shown whenever appropriate so that the gospel can continue, but at the same time it needs to be guarded, much like we saw in 2 John, so that we're not opening our homes to those who are undermining the authority of the truth. If we know they're walking in truth, if we're trying to guide them in walking in truth, then we show them the hospitality that they need. If they're trying to undermine it, then we need to be cautious, we need to be careful, we need to be protective. Now, I love the fact that the lesson also tied in the cooperative program in this idea of being co-workers with the truth. Because the cooperative program is one way that our church as a whole can give to support missions. We as a church give a percentage amount of our undesignated receipts that come in through our tithes and offerings. It goes to our state office, which then they send it to not only missionaries and mission work in our state, but then it goes to the North American Mission Board, and it goes out from there to missionaries across North America. It goes to the Southern Baptist Convention, and it does a similar process there. It goes to the International Mission Board, and some of it goes out to those missionaries. But on top of that, we also, as a church, take up special offerings throughout the year. At Christmas, we do Lottie Moon for international missions. At Easter, we do Annie Armstrong for our North American missions. In the summer, we do Georgia Barnett for our state missions. All of that is so that we can help support the work that others are doing. We're becoming co-workers with them. We may not ever go and join them shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand to do the work, but we can give some assistance to help them continue to do what God has called them to do and what He has placed them there to do. And the lesson summed up that thought there on page 90, saying when we give, pray, and support missionaries, we can be considered co-workers with the truth. And I love the fact that they didn't just, in talking about cooperative program, make it about the money. Because just as important, if not more important than the financial help that we give, is the prayer that we give. To pray for them. And when we have the opportunity to give other encouragement, if that means you feel led to write a letter to a missionary that you know, or to send it to North American Mission Board and go, hey, would you send this to any missionary that could use some encouragement, and send it out? You can go, well, actually, let me not say you can go. Used to, I remember as a kid, our RA group had a mission family that we sponsored. Not that we sent them much of anything, because I think our, bunch of little boys, our offering each week would account for probably about 45 cents between us. We didn't send them much money, but once a quarter, we would collectively write a letter, and we would send it to them. I don't know what their actual names were, but the names that we used, because they were in an area where they couldn't give their name as being missionaries, but they were the Pickles, the Pickle family. I don't remember where they were. I don't remember how many people were in the family, but I vividly remember us getting letters from the Pickle family and us sending letters to them. And just thought that was so cool that we were communicating with missionaries on the other side of the world, and we were being able to encourage them and talk to them about the things that we were doing and let them know we're praying for them. And, with a bunch of little boys and RAs, very few of us were eager to pray when our leaders would go, all right, who's going to lead us in prayer tonight? But when they would ask, who wants to pray for the Pickles? It was a race to see who could get their hand up the first, because everybody wanted to do something for them. And that's how it should be. We should have that kind of care and concern and hospitality towards those who are doing the work that we're all called to do, but in places where you and I might not ever get to go. Now, John mentions that he attempted to write a letter to the church as he transitions in verse 9. And in attempting to write that letter to the church, it was intercepted by Diotrephes. And though he never states what the letter was about, and it's interesting that John says, I tried to write a letter, but Diotrephes, got it, and he doesn't respect us. We don't have the information of what was in the letter, but John does warn about Diotrephes' pride and his lack of recognition for the leadership that John gave. And it brings to mind the question, how might pride and a lack of submission go hand in hand? And I think hopefully the answer is very clear. Because if we're prideful, then we're not going to be submissive. Because if we're prideful, then we know the best way to do it. Nobody can tell us how to do it. Nobody can do it better. So why would we submit to someone else? If we're prideful, we want our way done. We don't want somebody else's way done. Doesn't matter who they are. And that's what was happening here. And what damage can pride cause in a congregation of believers? Well, think about it. If everyone became prideful, no one would work together. Because everybody had their own agenda. Everybody had their own plan. Everybody had their own desire. Even if we back it up a little bit and we say half the people in the church were prideful, still, if half the people in the church are all wanting to do different things and wanting to do it on their own, the other half are going to be torn because everybody's going to want to partner with whoever they're closest to. It doesn't matter if you bring it down to one or two. If you have a handful of people in a church who are prideful and who want it to be their way or no other way, or they want to be in charge, or it has to be this way, it draws lines. That's what pride does in a collection of people. It draws lines in the sand and says, you're either with me or you're not. And that's a danger. When we're talking about a church, when we're talking about unity, and this we have seen throughout everything that John read or wrote, all of this that we've been studying, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, we see the warning that we need to protect the unity. We should love one another so that we can be united. We need to guard against the false teachings that will try to divide us. And even here, the pride and the arrogance of one who wants to be first. He wants to have first place. He wants to be in charge. We need to be careful. We need to be cautious. That's where the lesson transitions and talks about the troublemakers on page 90. Now, let's go ahead and read those verses, and then we'll go through these. It says, I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to have the first place among them, does not receive us. This is why if I come, I will remind him of the work he is doing, slandering us with malicious words. And he is not satisfied with that. He not only refuses to welcome the brothers himself, but he even stops those who want to do so and expels them from the church. Dear friends, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. The one who does good is of God, and the one who does evil has not seen God. John lays out in those few verses, those two verses, 9 and 10, about Diotrephes. He lines out 4 harmful actions of Diotrephes, and I would say 4 harmful actions of prideful people, and things that we need to be careful for, or careful of. The first one is he's slandering us with malicious words. And this word slander, the sense is outrageous words, baseless accusations, senseless prattle, meaningless, no purpose, no intent. And when I'm reading that and studying that this week, I'm thinking, man, this sounds like social media. That's what, in today's society, there is no proof. You don't have to have proof. You don't even have to have witnesses. You just get on social media, whatever platform you like to use, and you say, so-and-so did such and such. There it is. And all the world believes it because it's on Facebook. It showed up on Instagram. I saw a tweet. Well, big deal. I can tell you the sun is just a big flashlight that somebody's up in the sky holding. And if you believe it, then you're an even bigger idiot than I am for putting it out there. But that's the way it works now. And that's what Diotrephes was doing. He was just throwing out slanderous words, just making stuff up. No context, no content, no proof behind it, but just throwing it out there. But not just slanderous words, but he even went to the extent of calling it malicious words, which translates a word most frequently rendered evil. So we think of malicious, when I think of malicious, I think of, and maybe it's because it partially rhymes, but I think of something that's vicious. It's not just you said something ugly about something, but you said something so bad that it cuts this person down to nothing and could possibly destroy their life. It's one thing you have a bad experience at a restaurant and you leave a review of, and the service was poor. It's another thing to go on there and to just cut everything and start throwing things out there and throwing in baseless claims with it, things that you think might have happened, but you have no evidence that happened, that would cause them to have, detrimental effects from, maybe, the food board and all these other things that would come in, and health board come in and check. And when John says he's slandering us with malicious words, he's looking to cut, but it's the same sense of the word that we find in 1 John, where John was talking about the evil one that the young men in 1 John chapter 2 had conquered, who inspired the deeds of Cain in 1 John chapter 3. That same word malicious ties in with the same terminology that John used to describe Cain's hatred, that he used to describe the evil one that they had to overcome in John chapter 2. Basically, he's saying he's using words that come straight from Satan. He's attacking with bitterness. He's attacking with vengefulness. Basically, he was saying that Diotrephes, by his own works of his evil words, revealed exactly whose sway he was under. Which is why he says he has not seen God. The ones who do evil have not seen God. And then he says the second harmful action is that he refused to welcome fellow believers. And this phrase, refuses to welcome, is a flagrant denial of proper hospitality, a polar opposite from what Gaius was doing. Gaius is saying, hey, you're a believer, come on in. Let me encourage you. Let me take care of you. Let me show you a place where you can stay. Let me help you. And Diotrephes was, no, we don't need you. We don't want you. Go find somewhere else. The elder, John, had a serious problem if his representatives could not find welcome in a congregation. If he was trying to send some of his others that ministered with him and said, hey, look, go down to such and such church, go see this church over here because they'll take good care of you and you can stay there one night on your journey, on your way that you're going, and then they get there and Diotrephes goes, no, I don't care what John said, you're not staying here with us. That creates a problem. That not only creates a problem for the church, but it creates a problem for the network of churches, because now that church gets a what do you call it, a reputation for having a bad attitude, not being loving, not being compassionate. Thirdly, he says it's not just that he refuses, but he even stops those who want to do so. He refuses to welcome them, but then he stops others. That is, those who want to show the hospitality that he refuses to show, he steps in and goes, no, you're not. If you're connected to us, if you're part of our church, if you're part of what we're doing, you're not crossing that line. Now, immediately, if you're like me, you're thinking like, man, that guy's got some nerve. But apparently, in some way, and many of the commentaries I read said one of two things had happened. Before he asserted himself this way, he swayed himself into leadership, or he just completely took over leadership, ambushed it, stole it somehow, and now he's enforcing leadership. Maybe he was a big man that had a lot of sway in the community. Maybe he was a powerful individual in the community. We don't know what it was, but in some way he was hindering and preventing others from taking in those that he was refusing to show hospitality to. And then to the extent that if they went behind him and did it anyway, he expelled them from the church. This action echoes the synagogue experience of the blind man that was healed by Jesus on the Sabbath when he went in and he revealed himself to the priests that were there that he had been healed. They asked him, who is it that healed you? He says, well, I don't know. All I know is I was blind and now I see. And they rebuked him because he allowed somebody to, quote, work on the Sabbath by healing him. That same rebuke, that same sending him out and telling him he can't come in because of something because he was healed on the Sabbath, is a similar rebuke and expulsion from the church that Diotrephes was doing to those who were trying to welcome in these visiting ministers. So with that, John gives some warning and instruction there in verse 11. And we looked at this on Sunday, so we're just going to touch on it a little bit tonight. And I want you to notice in verse 11 a shift in focus. He's talking about Diotrephes, and now he comes back to give instruction to Gaius. And it's here where he tells him, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. The one who does what is good is of God. The one who does evil has not seen God. John appeals here to Gaius not to follow or support the actions of Diotrephes. In other words, not to imitate what is evil. Hey, Gaius, I know you already know this, but I want to warn you anyway. What he's doing is evil, and that's not what you need to do. Don't fall to his sway. Don't be convinced by him. Don't be persuaded by him. And on the flip side, doing good in this context is doing the opposite of what Diotrephes was doing. It's accepting those people. It's loving on them. It's showing hospitality to them. In contrast to the one who does evil has not seen God. And this sense of seeing implies a present state that has ongoing consequences. In other words, he's saying not only does he not see God continually, but in this moment, because of what he's doing now, this moment of action reveals a continual problem. His refusing them reveals that not only is he not seeing God now, but he really has not seen God. In other words, it goes back to what John warned about in 1 John, that there are some who are among you who have gone out from you because they were not of you. Where he warned about some who were false teachers and some who were antichrist. Where he warned in 2 John to watch out for these antichrists that would come in and try to influence and sway. Diotrephes is one that's done that. Just his is not so much a false teaching as it is a false practice. But his false practice, John is basically saying, comes from the fact that he never had a true salvation in the first place. He doesn't know God. He doesn't know the love of God. Therefore, all he knows is the evil that he has from his flesh. This accusation, or the accusation that Diotrephes, unlike John, had not seen God, and his actions were sinful in a persistent manner as a chosen lifestyle, is what John was saying. Not that it's just a moment where he messed up, but he has made a lifestyle effort of this. It's become who he is. It's not just what he has done. And then there's a very quick, again, as we saw Sunday, another quick change to sharing the testimony about Demetrius. There in verse 12, where he says, Demetrius has a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself, and we also testify for him, and you know that our testimony is true. The fact that he says Demetrius has a good testimony from everyone, or some translations say it, everyone speaks well of him. The verb that's used here is actually the word martyrio, which is seen in the English word martyr, but it means to testify, to bear witness, to speak for. The context might be more on the order of a sworn testimony, as in the court of law, than it is just simply, oh, he's a good guy. When John says that everyone speaks well of him, it's not just that people are polite about him, but that people would be willing to go to court and testify on his behalf, because that's the kind of person he is. He's that upright that other people's testimony about him would be beneficial. And this grammar indicates a reoccurring, consistent testimony over time, so has a culminative force with considerable momentum even now. It's not just, yeah, we're proud of the man he is now, but it's he still has, and he will continue to have a good report with the people because of the life he's living, because we see it. In other words, Demetrius had a really solid reputation with everyone that knew him in the Christian community. It begs to reason then that the veracity of this faithful follower was so solid that even the truth itself spoke on Demetrius' behalf. And we talked about this Sunday, the fact that his life was, his faith and his belief in God was so evident that it was as if the truth of God's word was speaking on his behalf and testifying of his faithfulness. Then again, to add to it just a little bit more, John says, we also speak well of him. And in this present tense, it probably includes this mention in the letter itself as part of that witness. In other words, part of the witness that everyone speaks well of him, even I speak well of him, those with me speak well of him. And in any case, the upshot, if you would, is that Demetrius was one of the best stand-ins that John could send on his behalf to go and assist for what is happening at the moment. Gaius, this is why I'm sending Demetrius, because he's the best fit. He's the best qualified. He's overly qualified for what we need done, and I'm sending him because I trust him. Page 92, you find this quote. The church today also needs men and women who love the Scripture and walk with impeccable character. We need more men and women like Demetrius. We need those whose lives so demonstrate the truth of God's word and the love that God has, that everyone who knows them knows that they have that reputation. There's no question, there's no doubt, there's no hesitation. And as we come to the end of our study, I want us to again go back and notice the phrase "dear friend," because it appears 4 times in this letter. Verse 1, verse 2, verse 5, and again in verse 11. And again, John's relationship with Gaius was genuine. It had been forged through time, was worth investing in, and he made that emphasis over and over and over. And here's the question and building up to the challenge of this particular lesson. How and where are we investing time and energy into healthy, God-honoring relationships in our family, church, community, and even reaching out to people we meet as we go about our day? Are we really investing? I'm not talking about just staying connected. I'm talking about actually investing in the relationships that we have to where we have that kind of connection. Where when we speak of someone, a lot of times we'll talk about people, we talk about, oh, my friend such and such, and we talk about somebody else, oh, my best friend. What sets that apart? And I know we talked about this earlier. It's the trust. It's the dependability. It's the faith that we see evident in their lives. What if we could create that trust, that dependability, and that faith? Because we can. If we invest in one another, we can build that. And it's actually how it happens. You think about the people that you're closest to, and the reason that you're close to them is because you invested in one another. One of my closest friends in the world, and it's really funny, because we hardly ever see each other, and we don't talk much more than we see each other face to face, but I still consider him my best friend, Bobby, that lives in Tennessee now. We grew up together in the youth group. We went to junior high and high school together, graduated together, and our senior year, we forged a bond because though he slept at his grandparents' house, being that his mom had moved to Florida before we started our senior year, he lived at our house. And for about half the school year, he ate almost every Sunday lunch at our house because we were lab partners in physics, and we had projects, it seemed like every other week. And so Sunday afternoons was the only time we had available between his work schedule and my practice schedule with basketball and everything else at school. So we'd come home, eat lunch, and then go in the backyard on the patio or in the shop, and we'd work on our physics projects, whatever they were. Because we forged the relationship then, it stands the test of distance and time now. And the fact that God has called us both into ministry, and when we do meet up, we get to encourage each other. When we're going through things, we reach out and we pray with one another, and those things. And there's others. I have other people that I would consider my close friends, my dear friends, because we've invested in each other. And that should be the case. There are members of your family that should have that kind of connection with you because you've invested in each other. But if we take time to invest in others, we can build those kinds of relationships with even more people. And so that when that one that has already come about, that one best friend that is already there, isn't available in the moment, there's others because you've invested here, and you've invested there, and you've created those types of connections. I would hope, and I'm going to get in trouble for doing it, but I would hope that when Miss Terry moves, she still thinks of us because of the investment that we've all made into each other. But that's the way it should be. If we live life together the way we're supposed to, especially as a church family, investing in one another, serving shoulder to shoulder with one another, those friendships can stand the distance. They can stand the time that we don't see each other on a regular basis like we once did, because the connection is there. That's what John had. It's what he was not only commending Gaius on, but we almost see it's what he was hoping to see happen in Gaius and in others, in the way they invested in those who came through and those who traveled into the church. And the last statement that the lesson makes for us is, may we all, like John and Gaius, point others to Christ's love by loving our friends well, by loving them, by investing in them. And this is a very unique way for me, and I almost didn't get it when I first looked at the outline of everything, why this is the focus of how they ended a series that was called Living with Assurance. But now I do. And here's where I think it plays in. Assurance isn't just for me to have peace that I have salvation. My assurance in my salvation is, yes, to give me peace, but to give me peace so I'm not focused on the worry and I'm not focused on the fear, but I can focus on love, I can focus on walking in the truth, and I can focus on being hospitable and helping others to find the same path that I did. And when this lesson focuses on living with assurance, it doesn't say living in assurance, but living with assurance. Getting past just, oh, I'm glad I finally know that I'm saved. Well, good. Now what you going to do with it? Now that we can have a confidence, now that we can have that assurance, now it's time to put it into practice. To let others see the benefit of assurance so that they can find the same assurance and then inspire others and encourage others. And along the way, help others to not only find assurance, but to find the salvation that they can have an assurance about. And it comes through these things. It comes through loving others and being hospitable, and all that works together. And y'all, I'm really kind of sad that this study is coming to an end, because I've enjoyed it. It's really challenged me. It's pushed me both in my study habits, but also I've read 2nd and 3rd John. I don't know that I've ever preached from either one or done much study on either one. But to be able to do this together as a church family has been just a blessing for me. I hope it's been beneficial for you. But more than beneficial and educational, I hope that it has been, at least in a small part, life-altering. Because my goal, anytime I do any type of study, and really any type of sermon, it's not so that you walk away going, man, I'm glad I learned that. I'm glad that people learn stuff. I'm glad that we get to gain new concepts and understanding together. But if that new understanding and those new concepts don't equate to new lifestyle, new changes, better life in service to God, then it was for nothing. And so I hope that these 7 weeks haven't just been a great educational process for you. I hope that it hasn't just been enjoyable Bible study, but I hope that through it you've learned something that you can apply in your life. If not, then I encourage you, go back and look back at those personal evaluations at the end of each lesson and readdress those questions, because those things, as much, and I'll be honest with you, some of them are very difficult. Some of them are not fun. I'm just going to be honest, because it's very convicting. After you do all that studying, you do all that reading, like, oh man, gosh, this Diotrephes is a horrible person. And you start reading, you go, I'm not a whole lot better. You know, when we start realizing and truly standing in front of the mirror of Christ and not comparing ourselves to this person and that person in our immediate surroundings, it gets real. But until we do, we're never going to grow. If we're not constantly measuring ourselves up to the standard of God's Word and the standard of the image of Christ, we are not going to grow and improve our walk. It's not fun. It's often painful, but it is always beneficial. So I encourage you, don't just hold on to assurance. If you found assurance through these lessons and through this study, then let's do what its purpose was. Let's live with assurance and let others see the assurance in us as we impact and influence the people around us. Let's go ahead and close in prayer for tonight. Heavenly Father, we come before you and we thank you, God, for this time that we've been able to just spend some time in your word. And Father, I thank you for this study that you put on the heart of all those involved, Lord, from Lifeway that published it to those who put in the time and effort in studying and writing the material. Lord, to those who put in the time and effort to purchase the books and read through them and study them and answer the questions and look up the scriptures and participate in the sermons and the Bible studies, Lord, and allow you to speak to us through this. And Father, I pray that our goal, no matter what it was in the beginning, God, maybe in the beginning it was just, I need a Bible study to encourage me. But God, I pray that by the time we got to the end, it was so much more than a Bible study. God, I pray that this was at least a tune-up of our spiritual lives, if not a complete overhaul, to get us back where we need to be, to stretch us more in our faith, to push us more in our obedience. God, that we would live faithfully the life you've called us to live. Live showing the assurance that you've placed in our hearts so that others who are lost would come to salvation in your Son, Jesus Christ, so that other believers would see the assurance in us and desire it themselves enough to search your word, and God, to align themselves with you, to have that assurance, and then to walk in that assurance. May we, Father, as we've learned, may we walk in truth. May we walk in love, in obedience, and hospitality, all for one purpose, to give you glory and honor, and to advance your kingdom. God, have your way in us each and every day. For we ask it in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.